Okay, hi, this is Tijen Genco. I am Master Certified Coach and Board Certified Health and Wellness Coach. Today is May 8, 2020. I'm giving that date because we will be talking about some requirements for certifications so that you can check the date out if you're watching this video 50 years from now. And I have Jillian Tosta with me. Jillian is one of my students, as well as she's a fellow certified life and well-being coach. And she noticed that I am being asked certain sets of questions quite often. So we decided to collaborate together to give you some answers. And having said that, I mentioned I'm a Master Certified Coach and Board Certified Health and Wellness Coach. I forgot to mention that I have experience in coaching pretty much every dimension in coaching, such as executive coaching, life and well-being coaching, and health and wellness coaching. So this intention today is that give you the answers from my background, my best practices. So take it with that idea in mind, and then you can make whatever that information makes sense to you. If it doesn't make sense to you, don't follow it. It's basically I'm sharing my experience and my biases and ideas about these concepts. So eventual decision needs to go through your own decision-making process. With that, let's get in, Jillian. What questions do you have for me?
Yeah, thank you for introducing me. I have a number of questions for you. Starting off with, does one need a certification to work as a health or life coach?
Okay, so unfortunately, the answer is no. In fact, that if you watch some of those reality shows on TVs, you can see that some people do need certification, and I doubt that they did, and they are doing health and wellness coaching or life coaching. At least we are doing this recording again within the United States. At the moment, the coaching is not a regulated industry, even though there is a board certification for health and wellness coaching area that people can declare themselves health coach, life coach, any kind of executive coach without having certification. Having certification adds to the quality of the coaching, because especially depending on where one gets the education, coaching inherited a lot of the evidence-based methodologies from the therapeutic area. So there are science behind it for the methods that are used in coaching if one goes through the certification. Yeah.
Yeah, so it sounds like even if it's not needed, there's a lot of benefits to the certification.
Well, I'm going to say yes, having heavily be certified person. I always believe in methodologies and evidence-based techniques and all that, as well as coaching is something that you are with another being and guiding them through their life. So ethically, I would recommend that you have as much as education you need to stand by somebody's side as they are asking you questions. So that gets back into one's own faculties and ethics and value structures if somebody wants to do coaching without any education.
Thank you. So is there any sort of situation in which certification is necessary rather than optional?
Absolutely. It depends on what you want to do with coaching. There are companies that are required for you to have certification for you to work together with, or organizations. Pretty much all the companies and organizations I work together with, they do require, specifically in my field, International Coach Federation certification. So depends on one's desire on what they are going to do with their coaching and how they are going to construct their business. What I found is that especially in the beginning, instead of one doing their own marketing, it's easier to work with certain organizations to start building your clientele. Mm-hmm. So if that's the path that one wants to follow, then often you're going to be asked for that. And if you're working for a particular organization that is not asking any certification, that's also an idea to keep in mind, that the legitimacy of the organization. So I would say that, again, how you want to establish yourself within the industry and what's the credibility you want to carry forward. But often credible organizations or companies, they do ask for certification.
Thanks for that clarification. And when is more than one certification necessary or needed?
It depends on what you want to do with your career as a coach. For the years, I haven't had a need to receive board certification for my health and wellness coaching, because I was already certified through International Coach Federation, ICF. Until that I worked with a company that they asked for that certification, so I went and get it. So in a way, it depends on how you're going to structure your business as a coach, as well as what organizations that you're going to work together with. Especially if you wanted to be a health and wellness coach and want to work within a regulated health area, such as a doctor's office or an insurance company, they may require for that. I just want to do a little bit of an additional information here. I keep saying that what makes sense for your business is holding a certification. It has cost associated with it. Yes, it's good, adds the credibility, but the more certification you have, more money you need to invest in obtaining the certification as well as keeping it current. So that's why I'm saying, if that makes a business sense for you, to go ahead and do it. If it doesn't, again, if you're just a passionate learner and you have the money, go ahead and do it. But remember, there is maintenance is required for the certification.
And I forgot to add that some of these questions have been submitted from other people. And so I'll just say that the next one I think you just touched on, but I want to see if there's any expansion to it, is how does one's career path relate to certification? Is there anything else you can say about that?
I think that what happens is, at least as a mentor coach, this comes to me a lot, that a lot of the people, my students at least, they resonate with me. When they go through a coaching education, I'm giving a long-winded answer here. They are being through an methodology that teaches them how to establish their specialty and niche in a very standard marketing techniques and the tools, and that often doesn't resonate with the people who are choosing to be life coach or health and wellness coach. So I would say that if you're deciding or having a difficulty finding what's authentically you and what's your essence, how you embed your essence into the coaching, it will be helpful to work with a coach or a mentor and get to understand you, and then make a decision about which certification to get to. Because what happens is that people without this understanding enroll in a particular program, like a life coaching program, a university program with an executive and organizational behavior and executive coaching, or health and wellness coaching. And then when it comes to the end of it, they realize, oh, well, this is just a certification for the program, and the program may or may not, often doesn't, have a well-recognized certification name. So then two of the things that we're focusing today, board certification for health and wellness coaching, as well as ICF, are more recognized. Then they need to decide on which one to go, or does it make sense to do both? But just, I would say, don't rush into it. Experience and understand yourself as a coach a little bit with your pro bono clients or whatever the clients, and see what's your calling, how is life leading you, and then maybe again work with a mentor, or take some webinars or workshops that I run them sometimes, and decide what makes sense, and then choose the certification path. I wouldn't recommend jumping into it, because again, there is an investment to that.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Thank you for that question.
So how does having a certification from a training program like ADAPT or Coactive compare to the certifications like NBHWC and ICF? You just touched on that a little bit, but is there more you can add there?
I think, yeah, I did touch on them. Again, those are programs established within themselves, but not necessarily globally known, at least just yet. Even the coactive coaching, for example, is well known over the years, but doesn't have the body that an international coach federation has. And so is the board certification for health and wellness coaching. These organizations are trying to establish certain standards, and eventually, maybe at least we are in the United States, they may get into further regulation to be part of the health structure legally. But right now, they are not a particular one organization. They have more, I would say, less biases about their organization. So like International Coach Federation has federations of coaches around the world feeding into what are the best practices and ethics and so on. So it isn't like that one organization decides within own biases what's good and what's not, and keep the certification versus the global presence of what's best and how to carry ethics. So those are some of the distinction, I would say, besides the recognition. Did I answer the question?
Wonderful.
Yeah, thanks.
I think, yeah, beautifully. So today we're touching mostly on ICF and NBHWC. Are there any other larger organizations you'd recommend looking into for certification?
Not that comes into my mind that they seem to be most well known at the time. However, I can say, let's say, if again, business sense, what happens is that my experience is I found people to take coaching as a secondary or the tertiary career path. So if their background makes sense, they can continue on carrying further additional certification that they had before. And in fact, I encourage people not to dismiss their past, because that's going to help establish the future of their business. But sometimes it also is helpful, such as if you are a health and wellness coach and it resonates with you, you may want to consider maybe getting certification through Yoga Alliance and adding that to your service offerings, and again, establishing your business sense. So certain other things, or maybe getting nutritional certification will be helpful. So decided, if I can talk, defining and deciding all that might be helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very individualized based on niche
Yeah.
and focus. And
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, let me find the next question. So how, in general, how do NBHWC and ICF compare with each other?
My experience, again, is that to me, ICF assesses much more coaches' ability to coach and the coaching competencies, how to be with another being, how to bring the core competencies into life. So I found the way that ICF assesses the coaching competencies is much at a much deeper level. Again, this is my personal opinion. When it comes to national board certification, their assessment in the coaching competencies are mostly relying on the schools that are teaching the coaching education. So it may or may not be as effective as the assessment or the requirement ICF is asking for the coaches for their certification. In fact, in most of my assessment, I found them not fully at the same level. Mm-hmm. And however, board certification requires much more understanding, specifically application understanding of the evidence-based methodologies and how they show up in a coaching scenario. And that's what they assess in the testing. So the assessment then gets into more of an application knowledge of the evidence-based methods and how they show up in a scenario. Yet at the same time, coaches may know that, but still may not be effectively coach someone. Knowledge isn't always translating into the expression of itself. You know, you may understand the knowledge, but still cannot relate to the client or fail in the coaching presence. So those two are not necessarily translating. And in one way, you have a breadth of knowledge. In another way, you have better skills, practical skills in coaching.
Mm-hmm. And then the NBHWC also has more information about health and wellness, correct?
Yes, there is an additional information about biometrics and health measures and so on that they are also being measured in that board exam. That is not necessarily part of the ICF. ICF actually really focuses on coaching competencies, and once understand that, you can take that and apply into different dimensions. In the health and wellness coaching, they're also wanting the coaches to understand the red flags, fitness and health and wellness red flags, as well as certain biometrics to assess the red flags within a coaching scenario. That doesn't mean that the coaches need to have claim themselves to be expert in health, but to be able to assess that if the client in a state of health and well-being to be coached, so that the client coachability is being assessed through that knowledge. That helps.
Yeah, and so potentially the different certifications might also be determined by someone's niche and career path like we touched on earlier.
Yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
And so, how does obtaining liability insurance relate to having a given certification or choosing?
That I wouldn't be able to answer that really, because at least that within the state that I am, I don't see a distinction when I obtain my liability insurance. So I would recommend that each coach really looks into where they reside, which country they are in, which state they are in. That is best to be checked, and it needs to be checked current. The information needs to be current. I wouldn't even want to recommend or say anything in this here, because it may become not current in the next day that people are listening. But I haven't really found the connection between those two over the years in my experience.
Okay, that's helpful. And how helpful are each of the certifications with acquiring new clients?
Again, it depends on how you want to establish your business. If you are in my recommendation as a mentor who helped the very large global organizations to run their businesses effectively is to find diversified ways to establish your client portfolio, or diversified ways to establish income paths. So what I did in my path is I established myself as a mentor so I can bring in the income from an education point of view or assessments point of view, assessing coaching. I established myself as an executive coach, which is where I originally started to begin with, and engaged myself into companies that they offer executive coaching. So I sit in their coaching bench so that they bring in the clients. And then I do that, I do it in different ways. And then, so in a way that different organizations are introducing you to the different platforms. And then you can establish clientele from that relationship, because the coaching is a very relational thing. People aren't going to be like looking at an Amazon and choosing a tool. It needs to be very personal. And in order to get to that personal level, you need to have some intimacy with the client. And so I would recommend that whatever the ways that people can do that, it will be helpful. And so if some organizations are going to help you to get there, find ways to connect with them, and then they will ask you, what certifications that do you have? So you can decide from that point of view. Did I answer the question on that?
Well, I have a follow-up. I think, that was a very helpful answer. And I if I'm correct, does ICF has like a list of ICF credentialed coaches or something like that? Does the national board have that as well? And how, if at all, has that helped you get clients?
Yes, thank you for that question. Both of the organizations list the certified coaches, as well as I don't think that national board lists the mentors in their website yet. They do list the continuing education providers. ICF lists the certified coach. They have a CCL, it's called certified coach listings, that you automatically get in there, and you can even pay extra money to have a little more zhuzhed up version of yourself. And then ICF also allows you to go through additional testing to be a listed certified mentors. And you can also get, if you're an educator like me, you can pay them certain money and fit into certain criteria to be a continuing education provider. I do have all three of those in both organizations. So when somebody is looking for certified coach, they can look into those listings in ICF, for example. People actually go to the ICF CCL, put into the certain criteria that includes in your listing. You can include the range of fees, your location, your niche, and other things. So people can click on those and then write their needs. Then you automatically get a request for proposal. And so it doesn't mean that you are going to be selected right away, but it may offer some businesses through that. How effective has that been for me? Not so much.
Okay.
I get here and there. I actually got, got more better quality references from ICF as a mentor coach than through their CCL, but it sometimes is helpful. Again, I also get more businesses through being a continuing education provider than otherwise. But you also need to think about it, that like there are Facebook groups specifically for national board certification. As they receive the requests, they post in there and so on. So there are benefits that you get to be notified by being part of the organizations. What I don't recommend, now this is bringing another idea to me, what I often noticed, I sit in the board for the Philadelphia chapter of ICF. And I was the VP of continuing education for that. And what I noticed at that time, that coaches will often come to the chapter meeting and trying to market themselves. But it just doesn't make sense, right? You're marketing yourself to the other coaches. You may get one person or not, but it's not the right platform. So if your idea is that you're going to market yourself to the other coaches, that doesn't make sense unless you're an educator or a mentor. So if that's the thought, don't do it. Again, ICF, because its presence has been so many years, they have much more coaches around the globe. But if your idea is also to connect to the like-minded people, that they offer chapters and they offer conferences and other things, then it makes sense to be part of. Yeah.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. All right. So how do state regulations affect certifications in a given system or educational path?
Well, I wouldn't be able to answer that because I haven't actually worked at that capacity with those organizations. And I believe again, coaching is not necessarily a regulated environment, even the board certification. I know that at least because of the way the exams are being run, in the exam centers, there are some sort of regulation to follow that. But otherwise, I will not be able to answer that.
Okay, thank
you.
Even
in the exam questions, that for the board certification, they avoid asking state-specific law-related questions because of its because it goes nationally, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the laws can change. That's
Yeah,
the knowledge. Yeah.
seems to be very inconsistent
Yeah.
between states.
Mm-hmm.
How do the certifications compare internationally in terms of recognition? Are you able to speak to that?
Internationally, I would say that again, it's also my first experience, International Coach Federation. I mean, it's well established, very well established in pretty much all the countries. And then the other organizations that as a mentor and an educator, coach educator, I'm part of like a association of coach training organizations. Pretty much over 90% of their members are ICF certified.
And so national board is that just the United States or is that international as well?
I believe it's international, but I think the exams are done in the particular country itself. So I don't know how exactly they are connected. I am much more connected. Their national bodies here, especially as a continuing education provider and an educator for them. But I am much more connected for ICF globally. Like I get even mentoring requests from the other countries because of its standardization around the world. That I mentor people in Japan, in Turkey, in Spain, and you know, it's much more connected.
Yeah. It's been around much longer, right?
It is, yes, I believe
the
it
ICF
was
has been
established in 1996, I think, with Thomas Leonard, yeah.
Yeah, so I could see how that would make sense. They would have a lot more establishment there.
Yeah.
How do the continuing education requirements compare between NBHWC and ICF?
ICF's requirements tiny bit more than the NBC-HWC. They both requires to be renewed every 3 years. And ICF makes a distinction between the core competency education and the resource development, they call it. So even when you're looking for training, you need to understand if the training is giving you core competency, continuing education credit, or resource development, and how is that divided? Because their requirement is much more into core competency. They required 40 hours, at least at this time. It changes again, so I don't want to give the numbers, but more requirement in the core competency continuing education credit than the resource development. Resource development, they accept that one can even do their own reading offline and submit certain number of continuing education credits. So it will be helpful to look into the core competency. I have not seen, we have a visitor.
I know, she's trying to make her debut on camera, sorry.
That's a good thing. Yeah, in the NBC-HWC, I have not seen that division. And other thing that I like to mention, and then of course the renewal cost, ICF's cost is a little more than NBC-HWC. And what I noticed as an educator for both is that they can accept each other's offered continuing education credit. I would say that it will be more rigorous review from an ICF side. If you got a continuing education credit from an educating provider from NBC-HWC's list, it may or may not give you the same amount of CEUs when it is submitted to ICF. Because of this distinction between the core competency versus the resource development. When I was sitting in the board, I got so familiar with submitting for continuing education credit, and I'm still familiar with it because I submit my mentoring sessions to ICF as well as the NBC-HWC. ICF looks at it, everything you submit, is it a resource development? Even if you're talking about evidence-based methodology, when you're teaching the method, they can count that as a resource development, not necessarily core competency. So there is a lot more technique involved to offer that, and one needs to be aware of that besides the collecting for every 3 years, collecting continuing education. You require for both. You can submit each of the credits for each of the organization, but you may or may not get exact credit numbers if you're submitting from NBC-HWC into the ICF. The other way around, I haven't seen. Yes, I am.
That's exactly what I was going to ask.
Yeah, and they accept, because ICF do a lot more rigor. So the way you write, it often is understood and accepted on the other side. Of course, it doesn't mean it's going to be 100% of the time, but that's my experience.
Mm-hmm. And so the next question was about if the continuing education's credits need to be from specific programs. ICF and NBHWC, do they have their own programs? And then are there also external programs unrelated to the two that you can take? How does that all work?
Yeah, they have their own providers, and often that what you see is that the provider, I'm going to step back for a second. In order to be a provider for each of those organizations, you have to write the content and submit. And when you are approved, they are granting you their particular CAU provider logo. So what the one needs to look for is the logo, or is it there or not? And they can also look at the approved provider list in each of the organization's website. Mm-hmm. And the person, you can go get other education that may not be on the list and submit it through the portfolio process. But again, you may or may not get the complete CEUs that was given to you for the course. I remember that when I was an internal coach for a Fortune 100 company, they often gave a lot of training. So I took 40 hours of training in the diversity and inclusion, and as to how to coach people. Out of that, 10 considered continuing education, and the 30 went into resource development. So you just need to keep that in mind and get extra credits if that's the case.
Mm-hmm. And I that just reminds me, when doing research about ICF, and if you get an ICF membership, I believe that CEUs are included in that membership for ICF. Do you know that is the same for NBHWC, or can you speak to that at all?
CEUs are not included. I don't know. For 3 years that you don't need to. When you're saying CEUs are included.
Sorry, I'll speak to that. I think when you pay for the extra membership of ICF on top of the credentials, I think that they give you either discounted or free
Oh,
CEUs.
yes. Okay, that makes sense. Yes, some, like I know, for example, NBC-HWC offers quarterly meetings that they offer CEUs, and they are free, but they're going to give you 4 CEUs out of whatever the total number will be when you're needing to apply, right? In ICF, some chapters do give you free credit CEU sessions, and some chapters don't. So there are, you may get some free CEUs out of that. That's part of the benefit of being part of these organizations. Yes, now I understand. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Well, we did just kind of talk about this, but do you see that either of them are more easily attainable to the CEUs for either program, or are they both pretty simple to find and acquire?
I would say that the difficulty isn't about finding CEUs. You can see that NBC-HWC, they just sent out an update a few days ago. They have 98 people on their list. And the 98 people have a bunch of things they are offering. So the challenge will be that what's the good quality? And how much does the person offering this knows really the coaching? And what are they talking about, right?
Yeah.
And
you're gonna go get continuing education, it might as well be really quality.
As a mentor, I need to be it needs to have high degree in quality, to my opinion. And how long have they been educated, and what do they know about how that is related? So I feel like that will be more challenge, and what you like, really, how to find what you like within that whole bunch of offerings, and will be more challenging. But there are same as in the ICF side. I mean, so many people out there. So it will be good to, again, the references are good. I get, like, often my students tell the others. So then you know that it's a good program or not a good program. And also you can check in with the chapters, again, local organizations and so on, and see what resonate, because they, at least that local chapters for ICF, they have monthly meetings, they have coffee meetings and other things. And I know that NBC-HWC is trying to do that, but I don't know if they're offering as often CEU meetings or not. And so you can get an understanding, but there is no problem finding CEUs. What needs to be kept in mind that, again, for ICF, you need to be present live, even if it's a virtual session, to get the core competency credit. If you want to watch things afterwards, that won't be a core competency. So that's part of the information to keep in mind. Did I answer that one?
Yeah, very informative. You're giving me lots of extra stuff to think about. And I'm sure my fellow coaches feel the same. Are you able to speak to the CEUs and which are more affordable? I think maybe you already said that ICF was a little bit more expensive. Can you clarify that for me?
Not necessarily. CEUs, not necessarily obtaining the CEUs are more expensive or not, depending on who is offering and what are they offering, right? You need to understand. As a CEU provider, for example, I did a very best I could that my mentor sessions offer 12 CEUs, because I wanted to make sure that I add a particular way the homeworks, so that even though people are attending 4 sessions a month, they still can get 12 CEUs. So that's like a maximizing their investment. You may not get that in every way. So you need to understand these sort of things, that how effective the CEU provider crafting their course for that. And so that's part of that. But what I meant by ICF is a bit more expensive is that ICF's renewal of membership and their the renewal of credentials tends to be a little bit more expensive at the time being than NBC-HWC within the US. That's what I meant.
Thank you.
That could change, yeah.
And so getting into the exams, how can you best prepare for NBHWC and ICF exams?
The ICF exams, basically what I would say is to really get a good mentor to practice your coaching skills. The written exam for ICF, I found it much easier. It's again checking the your ability to apply the knowledge into the situation, but it is an exam that you can take it at your home. You can start and stop the exam, and you know they're basically looking for the assessing in a much gentler and easier way to do that. Board exam, as it is in the name, it's much more time consuming and effort consuming, and takes about 4 hours at least for this time being. And you have to take it in an exam center. I would recommend, again, to take a good exam prep session with somebody who knows what they are talking about. Because I see a lot of exams out there with the exam questions or the recorded sessions that people are not necessarily staying with you. And they have a whole bunch of exam questions, although they may resemble somewhat, but they are not exactly representative of the exam questions, because the persons who are writing the exam questions, they are called item writers, they ethically cannot create questions to be utilized anywhere else but in the exam. So the people are offering these exam questions are somewhat trying to simulate, may or may not be exactly the same. So I don't want people to, if you are somebody like me, if I prepared with those questions and I went to the exam and took a few questions and they didn't resemble at all, I would be very disappointed, discouraged, and I can't continue as a, you know, so I want to keep that in mind. And if you're anybody like that, it may be helpful, but at least keep it in mind that those questions are not written by the item writers. They are trying to simulate as best as they can, and they're not necessarily going to be applicable exactly how the exam assesses. But if you're working with a mentor, at least that's what I do in my prep sessions, that I teach the students, break down the question, a case scenario, and what are the item writers are assessing in each scenario. I did interview one of the item writers to understand the techniques that they were using in the question writing, so that I speak to my students that what are they looking for, not necessarily simulating a question, but teaching them how to read the question and what to look for, and so on. So that will be helpful, because you still need to, as a person that's studying for the exam, you still need to study offline to carry the theoretical knowledge, but how to apply that knowledge into a situation will be very helpful for board exam, and will be helpful to work with a mentor to prepare yourself for that.
So helpful. I know those standardized tests can be really tricky to read those questions.
Yeah.
So it's,
and I wanted to.
I'm sure it's much appreciated that you learned about that.
Yeah, it was helpful to me, but I also wanted to go back to the ICF and say, it will be helpful for the ICF, because in ICF you have to submit a recording if you're submitting for credentials ACC or PCC, and 2 recordings if you're submitting for MCC. So it will be helpful to work with a mentor to get those recordings assessed, because it takes quite a long time, and you pay money, and then you wait then to figure out. I, as an assessor for ICF, I'm a portfolio assessor, I sometimes look at it like there is no merit in the recording. And if you don't know, you can just submit it. And then after such a long time waiting and investing, you're going to find out, oh, well, it didn't go. So I would recommend that work with somebody to develop your skills that is going to be helpful for you, that investment anyway, for professional development, and really will be helpful to prepare. As an assessor, we cannot say, oh, that will pass or not pass, but we are looking for some things called PCC markers, that ICF developed markers as we listen to the recording. That requires, the PCC markers requires a special training that is offered by ICF. I'm just making a sidebar here, that if you're going to work with a mentor, make sure that mentor has that training, even if they're not ICF assessor, which is going to be very hard. Only ICF chooses that who get to assess for them, but at least that the training is there. And then they can assess your recording based on the markers, and they can tell you, well, looks like through my assessment you hit these markers and you didn't. So then you can actually understand your readiness level. So that's the other part of it, which I didn't speak before. Is that clear?
Yeah, I think it's clear, as well as just to clarify too, for people listening, that for the national board, there is not a video, or a coaching session submitted, correct?
That is correct, because they are assuming that whomever given you the coaching education, they did the assessment. This is why I said earlier that I found ICF assesses the coaching competencies, the practical competencies at a much deeper level than NBC-HWC, because board certification is looking for the theory, and otherwise your practical application is only left to the assessment capacity that the organization you took the coaching education
right,
which they may or may not be the PCC marker trained or whatever. Yeah, so it just isn't the same level.
And so you had talked about mentors and how valuable they are. What does one need to bring to whichever mentor coach they choose to work with? Can you speak to that? Yeah,
like the most important thing is to chemistry, right? Like any coaching session, you need to learn from this person. And that doesn't mean that if your mentor needs to be exactly like you, maybe your learning style is different, right? Than how you relate to somebody. But their credentials are important. Their training is important. Again, I know that PCC marker training, because ICF didn't have much of resources to develop those training, very few people around the world was able to take that training. It will be helpful for a mentor to know them and also being able to demonstrate that. Their experience in the area that you wish to develop. If you're thinking about that you want to go into the life coaching, what's the mentor's experience with that? So that they can guide you through that particular scenarios might come in for you so that you can continue a mentoring relationship. What's their experience? How are they establishing their life? You know, there are mentors out there that their life is somewhat of a mess, right? Mentor somebody else. So I would say, look on those things, how successful this person is, how successful their business is, and what are their credentials and what are their biases, what are they going to teach you, that, right? They're grooming you for a betterment of you. What can they offer? I would look for their credentials. I would look for their education, their coaching dimensions, background. Again, how is their life? I mean, you're not going to be able to tell the coach how is your personal life, but you can at least see to Google them, right? What kind of things they're posting on Facebook and right? What is on their LinkedIn profile? So that should tell.
Yeah, those are some good things to consider. And so once you've picked a mentor coach, is there a standard sort of how to prepare to meet with one, or do mentor coaches tend to be individualized with that? Can you speak to?
Yeah, you can even request from the listings, CCL listings from ICF or NBC-HWC. They have it also in their website. You can request, call it the chemistry session, initial session. Often it's complimentary. So I would say do an interview, because in that time you are in the position of hiring, right? So ask them what is their credentials, what do they do, how long they've been mentor, how long they've been teaching, what's their other teaching background. And when they are giving you, for example, when I am doing a mentorship assessment, I ask the students to give me, which is a standard practice with ICF, a transcript of the session recording. And when I'm listening, I listen to the recording, then I go to the transcript, or everything the client said, everything the coach said, I'm writing feedback for the coach, so that it's not only in our time together, they have something written information, go back and grow from. What are the practices that the mentor is going to do for you? One mentor may look more expensive than the other, but what are you getting for that? Right? That you need to also think about. And so ask quite a bit of a question, what's important to you, how they are offering the feedback, what's their feedback style, and will that fit to your feedback style? And, what's their requirement? A lot of the coaches and mentors require that you meet them certain number of times. If that not fitting you in your budget and so on, maybe that's also something you need to consider. So that's are certain things to keep in mind.
Thank you. And so you've touched on it a little bit, but what do your private sessions look like when mentoring towards ICF?
For ICF, for me, again, it is completely, I run them in the direction of a coaching that the student is fully empowered to decide what happens in the session. And however, I don't create distinction for a student to tap into any of my experience experiential background. So they can actually take a session to decide, have a mentoring discussion about a recording, get a little bit of coaching in that session, a little bit of business discussion, whatever they want, they know, they get it. But traditional in the sense of ICF requires 10 mentor sessions for the certification. And I am also offering monthly group mentoring sessions, can be counted towards 6 of those requirements. ICF accepts about currently 7 group mentor sessions towards their 10 mentor requirements. Again, you need to check the currency of that. So therefore, in the individual mentor sessions, I'm often, again, asking the student to submit their recording to me in advance. I listen, look at the transcript, send them the written feedback before. So then the student can come. You said to me, let's have a dialogue about this during our session. Tell me, teach me, what is this that you feel I'm not demonstrating the competency fully. And so we work around their competencies for that. And so often though, what I found is that coaches, certain things that the coaches haven't worked on themselves yet, like their ability to establish clear boundaries, their ability to speak their truth, and so on, impede their coaching. So then we can have a dialogue about what is really getting on their way of demonstrating the competency, besides what competencies are missing. So they can learn a little bit about the technique. They can also learn and understand what's in their lacking in their self-reflective practice to develop the competency. Is that helpful?
Yeah, I'll just say that that was my experience getting mentored by you. Is I remember the first time we talked, you said, you get Tijen, you get all of Tijen. And it's like, so true. All the wisdom. And so very well-rounded. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Okay, so, well, I think we just answered this one about, they were asking if each session is spent reviewing a coaching session, but do you want to clarify that a little bit more on if it's just doing, do you review a coaching session every mentor session, or is that not necessary for your mentor coaching?
Again, it depends on the coach's needs, right? I would say that alternating as needed. If we see that let's say what I found, for example, direct communication is very often difficult to demonstrate it by a lot of people, because culturally we learn to push things under the rug, right? In many
Right.
cultures around the world. It's not only US thing. So then they may need a session or two to develop that or get over that social cognitive distortion. So we need to shift the behavior so that they can demonstrate the competency to tell the client what they see in an effective way. So it really depends on what's happening in the moment. But let's say if they are, and I give my students full freedom. If they cannot afford to have the coaching sessions with me, they can collect those things from the feedback sessions and maybe try to work with a peer coach or whatever that in their affordability, it may not or maybe or may not be as effective, but they still have other means to satisfy that, and they can decide the times that we spend in the competence development, or they can actually do mix and match. So it depends, but requirement is ICF is those individual mentor sessions are dedicated to competency development. And in fact, when I do them for the faculties, the academic environments that I'm part of, we are fully focusing on that. And I do a little bit of coaching in that, because as I said, if this is constantly coming in there, the coach are like not speaking the truth or not asking effective questions, then some of the things often that we need to coach them from. So, but 90% at least needs to be that competency development, yeah.
Okay. And so for this one specific to ICF, ACC, and PCC certifications, when can one start logging their coaching hours?
ICF grandfathers them in a way that you can start logging the coaching hours as soon as you started coaching education at the moment. So, but the key is that you cannot, often what will happen is that people want to go fix everybody around themselves. So you cannot not tell the person in your family that you're coaching them and count them as a coaching session.
Right.
So the person you're coaching needs to be informed, and they acknowledge and agree that you are in a coaching relationship and that's a coaching session. So yeah, those are the sessions that you can start accounting.
So that's interesting for me. I think for the NBHWC, you have to have passed your practical skills assessment before counting coaching. Is that not the case then for ICF? You can start from like practicum before.
Yes.
Wow, that's a difference. Can add some hours in there.
Yes, and for ICF, even if you're doing the peer coaching, the bartering, it is considered paid coaching because you're exchanging your time with other person's time.
Great. Yes, that's another important distinction for sure. So just to clarify, does one have to have their 10 hours with a mentor coach before they can log client hours for ICF?
No. The mentor coaching is just a requirement that to make sure you have a certain level. It is also helpful for the students, helpful for the organization, that assessors aren't basically getting all these recordings with no merit, and as well as that the persons are not wasting their money and effort, but yeah, no, they can actually go do a whole bunch of funny recordings often before they get into it's a joke aside, but no, you can actually often you're being mentored anyway. Any coaching, basically the practicum, when you get to the practicum, you're already being mentored, so you can start coaching recordings from the beginning without having individual mentor hours. Yeah.
Wonderful. So we're down to our last question. What courses would you recommend for coaches so we can help ourselves to get to the root causes of our issues so we can better serve our clients?
As a meditation teacher and the person that's done so much self-work, I cannot say enough that the self-reflective work is a necessity, not a luxury. And the solitude is a necessity, not a luxury, when you are in the business of coaching someone else, because your ability to take yourself to your depths is going to help you to take someone else to their depths. You cannot coach somebody to the depths that you haven't been to yet. So the more recognition you have, more awakening, awareness you have, more you have the capacity to support someone else to awaken. For me, every coaching is about awakening human beings towards their full potential. So, and to me, the coaching is about awakening another human being. So this is why I say that the more self-work is done, is more helpful for coaching capacity and the coach's growth. And it's also part of the self-care that you need to also keep yourself, your mind clear to be with someone else at that depth, at the level. If you're coaching from session to session, something else to this, your ability to stay present with another human being is not going to be as effective. Yeah.
And so do you have any suggestions for where people can look for self-reflective practices that could be beneficial?
I'm gonna say me no
Yeah.
but because those of you know that take the group mentor sessions with me, I put a lot of homework along those lines, but one can really get in anywhere if you like to listen certain podcasts that awaken that sort of an inquiry in you. It's a personal thing, that because everybody might have a different way of listening something, reading something that kind of starts to awaken something inside of you. You know, whatever that works for you is a good way. Whether somebody is going to find that in a yoga class, maybe somebody's going to find that in a CrossFit class, which I doubt, but you never know. So whatever works. But I would say that self-reflective practices, the teachers I like are Tara Brach and Pema Chodron and Carolyn Mace and Wayne Dyer's teachings, and some of those things that are out there were helpful in my growth, and I often share them as the references in my teachings, and people can find them even on my website, the free resources that I offer. So yeah, those will be my favorite ones, but yeah.
Well, thank you. That's the end of our questions. I just want to, thank you for taking the time to share so much information and wisdom with us. I really appreciated all that you've shared.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you for actually initiating this. It was coming from you, like Tijen, everybody's asking you all these things. And thank you for being my companion and a fellow coach for today. I appreciate that. And so those of you listen to us, we hope that you find this information helpful. Jillian spent a lot of time putting those questions together, and I did my best answering them, and we had a lot of fun together. So hope you enjoy and take good care.